When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Column YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be kind of a second part video, I guess. So last week I did a video talking about, would Robert have killed Jon Snow if he found out about him? Like, for instance, say, in that video I talked about, what if Robert had maybe his injuries weren't as severe and he had gone with Ned to save Lyanna, and doing that he discovers that Jon is actually Lyanna's son, and in that situation, would Robert try to kill Jon? How all that would go. So again, I would very much, for this video to fully make sense for you guys, watch that video first. I'll probably have a card up right around this time. I would highly suggest watching that because a lot of the motivations and why Robert maybe does that and goes to war, or some of the actions we're going to explore in this video, will make more sense. But with that being said, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment before we get into the video, please do. It helps the channel grow. Feel that I like this content as well. So let's set the stage. Let's say one way or another, Robert Baratheon decides, I'm going to kill Jon Snow. This kid is a Targaryen. And in Robert's point of view and what we go into his mind, Robert already didn't like Rhaegar and had a very bad opinion of him because of, he thought A, that Rhaegar kidnapped her, which I think in Robert's mind is still going to be the same. Remember, Robert really loved maybe the idea of Lyanna, not Lyanna actually herself. He doesn't seem like he truly understood who she was, but he basically takes away Robert's betrothed. And I don't think Robert, in his core, we explained this on the stream I did about Robert Baratheon, that could Robert have digested that they did this whole war built on the back of, okay, Rhaegar kidnaps Lyanna. Could Robert have stomached that Lyanna actually didn't like Robert and that she liked Rhaegar, this guy that Robert completely hated? So I think in Robert's mind, he would be convincing himself that Rhaegar still took Lyanna and was just raping her, and this is a child of rape. So you put that together with the idea that Rhaegar still is the reason Lyanna dies, and you put that with the idea that Robert still hates Rhaegar. I think you could come to the terms that Robert would still want to kill Jon. Now, this is where we enter an interesting point, because if this leads to war between Robert and Ned, because Ned in no way, shape, or form is going to let Robert kill Jon. He makes a promise to his sister to protect Jon, presumably, right? That's what we're presuming the promise is. Again, this entire what-if theory goes off of Rhaegar and Lyanna being Jon's parents. So if you don't agree with that, well, that's where we're going with this theory. So let's set the stage. Again, I think there's certain things that play out the exact same. I think the Lannisters still make an alliance with the Baratheons, and that's because Cersei's still going to marry Robert. All of that's going to stay the same. Now, there are some question marks whether Jon Arryn would even get involved in this war, or would the Vale of Arryn commit to either side? Because again, Jon views both of these people like sons. Now, the only issue with this is that Jon Arryn's in a very precarious position. He's the hand of the king. If the hand of the king just stays out of this war, what's going to happen? Because again, Ned, let's also put this into perspective, was also already pissed off at Robb already. Because Ned is this character, and we learn this in Ned 2 when he's thinking back on this time period. Ned and Robert actually have a fallout. The only thing that brings Ned and Robert back together is Lyanna's death. They both grieve over her death. And in this situation, that wouldn't happen. They wouldn't be coming back together, because Robert then, after she dies, would be wanting to kill Jon. And again, I talked about in the video, I think you guys should watch before this one, Robert is prone to having these moral lapses in judgment where he doesn't really care about getting dirty at times, right? Like, he's perfectly fine with the Targaryen kids dying. And yes, he didn't do it himself, but he's perfectly fine with that. That's one of the reasons, if you look at it from Lyanna's point of view, why I think she wanted Ned to promise secrecy, and she realized how dangerous Jon could be. So when we're drawing the playing field, it's very hard to predict characters like Jon Arryn, because I think the only way he would be able to stay neutral is if he resigned his hand to the king. And that opens up an even more interesting point. Because then who becomes hand of the king? Is it someone like Tywin? Maybe it's Stannis, but I don't even know then, because Stannis is extremely young. You'd have a really interesting dynamic there. And the Tullys, I think, would kind of be forced to back the Starks, you would think. But then if Jon Arryn is on Robert Baratheon's side, you'd have an Arryn girl or a Tully girl on both sides. So who does Hoster back? And I think with the idea of the Lannisters being on the side of the crown, I'm not sure how that works. And if you're looking at it from the Reach's point of view, I think they would probably back the crown as well. Or at the very least, just stay out of it. The Dornish, now, some people have suggested that the Dornish may have helped the Ned Stark camp, just because you have the idea that they would be going against the people that killed Elia and her children. But at the same time, it's awkward because the Dornish would then be going for a kid that was Rhaegar and Lyanna's, the woman that Rhaegar ended up going with and cheating on Elia with. So it's a really, weird situation for the Dornish. And I think the Dornish joining the Starks kind of feels like a hopeless cost. Now, I actually think in this scenario, the Tullys not being involved in the war is actually to the Starks' benefit, because I don't think the Starks can win a offensive war. I just don't think it's possible. I don't think they'd have the backing, the gold, anything to really do with that. So I think the way the Starks do this is that I think Ned basically says, Robert, screw you. This isn't happening, right? I'm not letting you kill Jon. I'm retreating to the north. And he just fortifies the hell out of the north. And we know, again, I just got done reading Sansa 1, and it gives a very vivid description of kind of the neck and how it would be extremely difficult to siege Moat Cailin from the south. I don't see a situation in hell where they're able to invade the north and take it over. It's not possible. I think with the dragons, it was possible, but not with any normal force. And the question would be, in Robert's anger, would he push that, or would he just let it go? Because either way, what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think this creates a situation where Ned dies, but I think this could create a situation where the North is kind of in a Dorne situation with the Targaryens, where I don't think Robert can conquer the North, and I think it'd be suicide to even try. If he did, I think that's where he would lose. I don't think Robert, the way he uses his strategy of just rushing into things, would not work. It just wouldn't work. If you did that in the North when it was, very vast, tough conditions, it's not going to work. Right? So I don't think Robert wins that war. I think what we see with Robb, right, where I think Robb could have fought a very defensive war if he wasn't involved with having the Tully army, could have just sat at the neck and he would have been fine. I think that kind of comes to play with Ned here as well. And what do we do? Because we can kind of fast forward into our normal story, because there's not going to be any huge things going on outside of that. But what is going to happen now is, as time goes on, there is going to be a known Targaryen outside of Viserys and Dany. So if any kind of rebellions come up, and I don't think this is what Ned's going to do. I don't think Ned is going to raise Jon like he's the heir to the throne or this or that. I think Ned's basically just going to break away from the Seven Kingdoms. I think he's not going to really answer to Robert. I think at this point, Ned is kind of done with Robert's bullshit. And it kind of leads us to this weird situation. Because how does Littlefinger, because we know Littlefinger wanted to get kind of some revenge on Ned and wanted to create some chaos between the Starks and the Lannisters. At this point, how does that work for Littlefinger down the road? Because if he poisons Jon Arryn, Well, the hand of the king is not going to be Ned. Robert's not going to go to Ned. It's just not going to happen. The relationship is too fractured at this point. There's no coming back. So then who becomes hand of the king? Is it Tywin? Is it Jaime? Is it Stannis? Is it Renly? There's even like talks that Littlefinger. It's a really weird situation we come to, because Ned is not going to be the person that is going to be in that hand of the king role. And what I think is interesting is I really don't think there is going to be a War of the Five Kings. And if there is one, it gets really weird then, because what does Littlefinger gain, I guess, from preventing the truth? Because if he wants to prevent the truth of the parentage of Robert's children, or not Robert's, but Cersei and Jaime's children, he still has to go with the same idea of killing Jon Arryn. But the problem is, in the normal story, we know why Littlefinger does it. And this situation, I don't know who is going to reveal the information. Because then at that point, you would have Stannis, who knows some sort of information, but Stannis immediately retreats to Dragonstone. And he starts beginning to buy swords, but he has absolutely zero proof and has nothing he can kind of say to legitimize his claims. Could Renly uncover it? So I think the more logical way we would go with this is that eventually Renly figures it out. So I think this is happens even quicker if Renly is made hand of the king. Like, say Stannis backs off, he goes to Dragonstone, and let's say Robert, in the meantime, I don't think he names Renly hand of the king. I think because of Cersei's urging, he either does Tywin or Jaime, which is I think it's a bad move, personally, for Robert. I think a Renly uncovers it. Now, the issue here is that if Tywin is in charge in King's Landing and he's hand of the king, Renly's screwed. I don't think he can act in King's Landing and outmaneuver Tywin. So again, this is a weird situation, because I actually think, yes, Joffrey maybe coming to the throne at some point is not good, but I don't know what Renly is going to be able to do to outplay Tywin in King's Landing. It doesn't seem like it's going to work. And then you also have the idea that now that Sansa is not betrothed to Joffrey, if Tywin's made hand of the king, Tywin could then go, okay, let's marry Joffrey to Marjorie. Now we ally ourselves with not only the Baratheons, but we also have the Tyrells as our allies. Also, another key thing to remember here is that there's now no one like preventing Robert from holding back from killing Dany and Viserys. So more attempts could be made on that, right? Where Robert, it doesn't take it, there's no pushback. It just happens. And Jorah Price still thwarts those attempts, but again, there's just no pushback. So that could continuously keep happening. Also, there's no reason really for Cersei to kill Robert at this point. Maybe she still does. Could happen because she just doesn't like Robert. But there isn't as much urgency to it, right? Like, there's no real threat of it getting revealed. It would be more important for Cersei to kill Renly than it would be to kill Robert at this point. And so again, I think it's actually, we're in a stable kingdoms. The only like part of this that changes is that there's a lot less warfare, in my opinion, unless something crazy happens. And you guys would have to let me know what that is, but I don't know, without the Starks intervening and Ned revealing it, how that really impacts anything. Could Littlefinger see a better route just being, okay, he lets Jon Arryn live, and instead Jon Arryn reveals it and then starts a war between Tywin and Robert? Maybe? I just don't see that happening. So the next kind of point of this would be, okay, well, Jon also isn't going to get sent to the wall. That's another thing. The reason I think that Jon gets sent to the wall is, one, because Catelyn hates him. And that would not happen in this situation. Because in this situation, Jon's actually going to grow up pretty well. Because Catelyn's going to know, okay, this isn't Ned's bastard kid or whatever. This is his sister's kid. That's why he loves Jon so much. So he's not going to be forced to the wall. And also with his parentage already being revealed, there's no point of that. So Jon doesn't go to the wall. And that kind of affects the wall much differently. But at the same time, when you have Mance Rayder eventually try to attack the wall, majorly different. Ned Stark's going to be there to support the wall. That effort is going to be much more difficult, and I don't really see the Wildlings being able to do much there, because you would just really have a united northern front against the Wildlings. So that would be kind of how that goes. I think some of the stuff at the wall would still play out more or less, but Jorah Mormont, or why did I say Jorah? Jeor Mormont would actually die because Jon is not there to save him from the White Walker attack, or the other attack we do see. Other things to think about as we get further into the story. Because again, I really don't feel like there's going to be a lot of conflict going on. Unless Littlefinger can make some. Because like I've said, if he is made Hand of the King, he's basically just going to establish Lannister power even further. There's really going to be no way, I think, of a war starting once Tywin's there. Especially if Tywin's smart and gets Marjorie married to Joffrey. And then you could see other marriages as well, maybe trying to marry off Tommen or Myrcella to the Dornish, like we already see in the normal story. So again, a ton of things could happen there. We could also see the Vale trying to be linked into King's Landing as well. Now, this one's a bit different if Jon Arryn is killed, which I do think still probably happens. Because again, this is the Littlefinger's way of seeing that he could gain power through the Vale. I think if you're Tywin, you could look to try and get Robin, Arryn, and Myrcella. That could be a huge thing. And then switch it up and try to get Tommen to Arianne. That could happen, but again, I think both parties would, or not both parties, but I mean Dornish and the Vale probably wouldn't like that, but that's what Tywin might try to do there. Tywin could even try to fix the issues with the North, but again, Ned's not going to like the Lannisters. I don't think he's just going to betroth, for instance, Sansa to Tommen or anything like that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, I think, for Ned, because I think Ned is going to become, and the North as a whole after this point, basically becomes an isolation place. Like, they're not going to really be involved in any southern politics. They'll just be kind of focused in on themselves. Now, the more interesting part of this comes when we get to the threat of the other. Because a couple things change in this regard. One, the Horn of Winter, which is presumably with Samwell, is probably not found. Two, with that being said, if the Horn of Winter is not found, does this mean that the others have no way of breaking the wall down, if that's presumably how they're going to get through the wall? So, if they can't get through the wall, you have a united northern front so that they actually could man the wall if this threat keeps getting worse. Do the others actually pose that big of a threat? Other places we could look at. Does, for instance, Balon Greyjoy end up dying? Or does he start any type of rebellion? I don't think that happening with no conflict going on. Don't see that really being a factor. And one of the major reasons Balon Greyjoy even gets the balls to do anything is because Robert and Ned both die. So again, don't think he acts out of order right now. I mean, maybe he's more stupid than I thought he was and he tries something. Who knows? So I think we're actually at a quite peaceful moment until somebody gets the idea to try and conquer the North again. I actually think we're okay. And then the real interesting thing becomes once Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen kind of grow into their own, and let's say Robert dies and Joffrey comes to the throne, it's going to be kind of too late to try and disprove that they aren't Baratheons because it's taken so long. So as the years go on, it makes less and less sense to try and say that they aren't Roberts, because it's like we've had all of these years now and it's not being brought up. And I think Stannis sitting on this, I don't know what he could do, because if he rebels against the crown, he's going to lose. He's just straight up going to lose. I think in this what if, and maybe it's an idea of this is kind of the boring route, but it's not really a whole lot that actually changes for the worse. Now, Dany's a very interesting kind of part of this. Because we have to remember, for the most part, Westeros is completely united. Completely. So what then happens if Dany comes over? Now she has 3 dragons. She'd have a very large army. But who's going to be on her side? Maybe the Dornish? That's very possible. But when you have the Lannisters, you would have probably the Tyrells together, the Baratheons together, besides maybe Stannis. I think Renly would just kind of bite the bullet. I don't think he can really do anything. And possibly the Vale and even the Riverlands. Because I think the Riverlands, again, they're still going to be part of the kingdoms. I don't think they secede with the North. I just based upon you have 2 daughters. If you're Oster Tully, I don't think it makes sense that he sides with one daughter over the other unless Jon Arryn stays out of the war. So, I think you have a united front against Dany. And you have much more military expertise against maybe fighting the dragons. Against Dany, who's just not as well trained. And the biggest thing that I completely forgot, Barristan is not dismissed from the Kingsguard. So actually, Dany dies. I just thought about this. But actually, there is no Dany problem. And even if there is, let's say that somebody else saves her. I still think that Westeros and the united front of the Baratheon Lannister camp actually beats Dany, regardless of the dragons or not. So, to me, I actually think we're in a peaceful Westeros. I think this is actually a decent outcome, and that we're actually in a better place because the others have no way of getting through the wall that we know of right now. Maybe George has another way. We just, as of right now, the information we have, they can't get through the wall. The Wildlings attacks just wouldn't be as successful, right? You'd have the full power of the North backing the wall. Again, Ned is someone that respects the wall a lot. He would be there to back them up if there was a Mance Raider threat. Ned even thinks about this in some of his opening chapters with, actually, I think it's with Catelyn 2 or 1, where he literally says this, that he may have to ride out to face the Wildling threat at some point. So again, all of that's safe. So then it becomes, okay, Westeros, like the rest of Westeros, their politics, is there going to be any infighting or war? I don't think so at this point, besides maybe Stannis, but I don't think Stannis is going to be able to garner really any power to fight the rest of the kingdoms. And Dany is probably going to die because Barristan's not really there to save her. So again, I actually think this works out better. Maybe in the long term it doesn't work out so nice. But because how would you deal with the North? Would they eventually come to some sort of peace thing where the Starks maybe marry into the Baratheon or Lannisters generations down, and that would be kind of how the North comes back into the fold? But again, I don't really see a way that if Robert tries to kill Jon, that Ned would ever stay in the kingdoms or would ever, like, you know, he would just go north. Maybe if he doesn't succeed, maybe he just sits up there and is like, don't come up here. Possible. But yeah, that is my thoughts. Maybe I'm taking the wrong approach to this, but that was my initial impression of this What If. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.